History is mostly just a long list of people making spectacularly terrible decisions. Forget the boring textbook stuff. We are looking at historical moments so aggressively stupid, you will wonder how the human race survived this long. From government-funded cyborg cats to radioactive campfires, these real events prove reality is far dumber than fiction. 1. The American legal system is notoriously broken, but one man in California officially beat the entire matrix. He threw a boomerang, wildly misjudged how the toy actually functions, and it immediately returned to smash him directly in the eye. Instead of feeling deeply humiliated, he sued himself for $5 million. His legal argument was that the boomerang was defective specifically because it worked perfectly and came back. The genius part is that he successfully forced his own homeowner's insurance policy to pay out the millions, proving that profound stupidity can occasionally be highly profitable. 2. You really have to question the logic of strapping 1,000 helium balloons to a cheap patio chair. A Brazilian priest thought this was a brilliant way to break a flight record. His preparation, however, was spectacularly terrible. He completely forgot to learn how his GPS worked, ignored the wind direction, and confidently floated straight out into the open ocean. Adding insult to his own injury, he actually brought a satellite phone but had absolutely no clue how to operate it to call for a rescue. Turns out divine intervention does not cover gross negligence and a total lack of basic navigation skills. 3. The British Royal Navy essentially handed over their most heavily guarded top-secret warship in 1910, just to avoid a slightly awkward social interaction. Author Virginia Woolf and a few eccentric friends slapped on some highly questionable fake beards, threw on ridiculous costumes, and demanded a VIP tour, claiming to be Abyssinian royals. The military officers were so terrified of being impolite that they never once questioned why these so-called foreign dignitaries were speaking utter gibberish mixed with random broken Swahili. A group of giggling writers successfully breached national security using nothing but terrible makeup and the legendary British fear of bad manners. 4. There is a highly specific brand of insanity brewing in Wales every single year since 1980. It is called the Man vs. Horse Marathon. And yes, it is exactly what it sounds like. Grown human beings willingly line up to sprint 22 miles against actual galloping beasts. But the truly humiliating part for the animal kingdom is that humans have actually won this thing multiple times. If you ever doubt human determination, just remember that over a long enough distance, we are arrogant and stubborn enough to literally outrun livestock. Somewhere out there is a majestic racing horse deeply traumatized by losing to a sweaty accountant named Gary. 5. Firing a live torpedo at your own commander-in-chief is generally considered a terrible career move. But in 1943, the crew of the USS William D. Porter did exactly that. During a routine drill, someone entirely forgot to disarm an explosive round and accidentally launched it directly at the battleship carrying President Franklin D. Roosevelt. By pure luck, they missed. But the entire crew was instantly arrested the second they reached the dock. The ship spent the rest of its miserable existence as the ultimate floating punchline of the U.S. Navy until it finally, and somewhat mercifully, sank to the bottom of the sea. 6. Back in the early 1900s, city councils across America were gripped by an absolute panic over weaponized women's hats. Fashion dictated the use of massive, razor-sharp pins to keep giant headwear in place, and men were terrified. They genuinely believed women were treating these pins like literal swords to win arguments on public transit. Politicians were so intimidated by this haberdashery threat that they passed emergency laws strictly limiting hat pin length, supposedly to prevent intentional stabbings. Imagine being a tough, turn-of-the-century guy who has to write a city ordinance because he is deeply afraid of a lady's hair accessories. 7. Mother Nature has a truly wicked sense of irony. When a massive rogue wave slammed into a cargo ship in 1997, it knocked a container holding 5 million Lego pieces straight into the ocean. The ridiculous twist is that a massive chunk of those spilled toys were specifically sea-themed. We are talking tiny plastic pirates, rafts, and miniature scuba divers. Fast forward to today, and perfectly preserved little plastic flippers and octopuses are still regularly washing up on the beaches of Cornwall. It is the world's most colorful, never-ending shipwreck, permanently turning the British coastline into a bizarre hazard zone for barefoot tourists. 8. Medical experts in 1726 were apparently incredibly easy to fool. A woman named Mary Toft successfully convinced the brightest medical minds in England that she was magically giving birth to litters of rabbits. Her flawless strategy involved secretly stuffing animal parts up her dress and dramatically delivering them in front of highly educated doctors. Astonishingly, these brilliant men bought the entire performance, genuinely believing she had crossbred with a bunny. Even the king's personal surgeon was completely bamboozled. The magnificent scam only collapsed when a skeptical local finally caught her casually buying standard rabbits from a market vendor. 9. Sports rivalries get heated, but El Salvador and Honduras took stadium rage to a terrifying extreme in 1969. The absolute breaking point between these two neighboring countries was a World Cup qualifying soccer match. Political tensions were already at a boiling point, but the fistfights that broke out in the stands rapidly escalated into actual full-scale military bombing raids and a ground invasion. History officially remembers this brutal conflict as the Football War. Roughly 3,000 people tragically lost their lives simply because a soccer game got violently out of hand. That is one hell of a penalty. 10. The picturesque Austrian village of Hallstatt is home to just 700 quiet residents, but they recently had to hire massive bouncers to guard their local church. The reason is absolutely infuriating. Hordes of oblivious tourists completely refuse to stop taking smiling selfies right in the middle of active, weeping funerals. Thanks to social media, over 1 million influencers invade this tiny town every year, treating grieving families like free background extras for their vlogs. It created a literal zombie apocalypse of aggressively rude behavior, forcing the town to employ heavy security just to keep people from live streaming open caskets. 11. New Jersey in the 1980s was home to Action Park, an unregulated concrete playground that treated visitor safety as a hilarious suggestion. Their absolute masterpiece of negligence was the Cannonball Loop, a water slide featuring a full vertical loop that completely defied basic physics. Management shut it down almost immediately after test dummies literally exited the tube missing their heads. When foolish locals finally tried it, they emerged with knocked-out teeth, lacerated backs, and lifelong trauma. It was not a theme park. It was a brutal survival simulator disguised as summer fun. 12. Holding a grudge is natural, but Pope Stephen VI took petty revenge to a genuinely psychotic level. He hated his predecessor, Pope Formosus, so deeply that he ordered the man's rotting corpse to be dug up and dragged into a courtroom. Stephen propped the dead guy up on a fancy throne, screamed at him for hours, and formally found him guilty of perjury. He then chopped the corpse's fingers off and chucked the body into a river. The local citizens found this slightly unhinged, so they naturally rioted and strangled Stephen to death shortly after. Just a typical Tuesday in the medieval church. 13. Sometimes the greatest military force on the battlefield is just incredibly angry insects. During World War I, British troops attempted a massive invasion of German East Africa. Unfortunately for them, they stomped right through a jungle filled with enormous hives of highly aggressive killer bees. The furious swarm attacked with absolute zero discrimination. Total chaos erupted as both the British and German armies completely panicked, dropped their heavy rifles, and sprinted away in opposite directions to escape the stinging nightmare. The bees easily secured a flawless victory that day, entirely dominating two modern armies while taking absolutely zero casualties. 14. Decorating the White House lobby with a 1,400-pound wheel of cheese sounds like a joke, but President Andrew Jackson actually did it for 2 solid years. Predictably, the massive block of dairy started to smell like a highly radioactive biological weapon. Desperate to eradicate the foul, eye-watering stench, Jackson devised a truly brilliant, unhinged plan. He simply invited the general public inside to eat it. A ravenous mob of thousands stormed the executive mansion and completely devoured the giant cheese in under 2 hours. The cheese was finally gone, but that horrific smell supposedly haunted the presidential carpets for months. 15. We have all wanted to punch a wall out of anger, But King Darius of Persia was the undisputed drama queen of the ancient world. When a sudden storm destroyed his massive military bridge across the Hellespont, he decided the only logical response was to physically punish the ocean. He ordered his highly trained soldiers to whip the water 300 times and violently hurl heavy metal shackles into the waves to officially arrest the sea for being disobedient. The man literally tried to emotionally manipulate and torture a massive body of water. Spoiler alert, the ocean did not care at all. 16. New York City exploded into pure, unadulterated chaos in 1922 over the most ridiculous fashion rule imaginable. Welcome to the Straw Hat Riots. At the time, an unwritten societal law stated that absolutely no man could wear a straw hat after September 15th. When a few rebels dared to keep their summer headwear, massive mobs of teenagers took to the streets. They violently snatched hats off heads and physically beat anyone who broke this imaginary fashion code. The madness escalated so quickly that a massive police response was required just to stop people from brawling over seasonal accessories. 17. Some guys cannot handle a breakup, but Carl Tanzler took rejection to a felonious extreme. This Key West radiology tech became terrifyingly obsessed with a young tuberculosis patient. When she tragically died, Carl casually broke into her mausoleum and stole her rotting corpse. He held her together with wax, glass eyes, and coat hangers, and lived with her body for 7 deeply disturbing years. He even built a massive homemade spaceship in his yard, fully intending to fly her corpse into the stratosphere so the radiation could magically resurrect her. That is not a romantic tragedy. That is just a severe health code violation. 18. The United States accidentally won a tiny piece of the space race using nothing but a giant bomb and a sewer lid. During a massive underground nuclear test in 1957, the sheer explosive force blasted a solid steel manhole cover straight up into the sky. A scientist did the math and realized that heavy piece of metal was traveling at roughly 130,000 miles per hour. It was moving so unbelievably fast that it likely became the very first man-made object to entirely leave the atmosphere. America practically beat the Soviet Sputnik to space by sheer, accidental brute force. 19. Earning your legal retainer fee is important, but Clement Vallandigham took his job way too seriously. Defending a man accused of murder in the 1800s, this incredibly confident lawyer wanted to prove to the jury that the victim could have easily shot himself by accident. He grabbed a pistol, passionately demonstrated exactly how the fatal mistake could happen, and promptly blew a hole in his own abdomen. His demonstration was incredibly convincing, and he undeniably won the case for his client. Unfortunately, he bled to death on the floor moments later. That is what you call dying for the defense. 20. Your morning breakfast could have looked drastically different if a crazy 1910 political plan had succeeded. The U.S. Congress seriously debated a massive bill to import herds of live African hippopotamuses directly into the swamps of Louisiana. The genius logic behind this was that these massive, aggressive beasts would eat invasive plants while magically solving a national meat shortage. We were literally a single political vote away from hippo bacon becoming a staple of the American diet. Imagine being a swamp farmer tasked with rustling a 2-ton, incredibly angry water monster just to get some sausage on the table. 21. When the U.S. Postal Service proudly launched Parcel Post in 1913, cheap Americans immediately started looking for the craziest loopholes. One highly frugal couple in Ohio realized the new weight limit allowed them to literally mail their 8-month-old son to his grandmother. Why? Because slapping 15 cents worth of postage stamps on his clothes was drastically cheaper than buying him a proper train ticket. Astonishingly, hauling an infant around in a mail satchel was entirely legal at the time. The Postmaster General eventually had to step in and firmly ban the shipping of human babies, ruining the ultimate travel hack. 22. The French military attempted a highly stealthy invasion of Britain in 1797 by landing on the coast of Wales, but the plan immediately fell apart. These highly trained soldiers decided to celebrate a bit too early and got blackout drunk on stolen, looted wine. Stumbling around the countryside, they spotted a group in the distance wearing tall black hats and bright red garments. Terrified that they were facing elite British grenadiers, the drunk Frenchmen swiftly surrendered. The hilarious twist? It was just a group of local Welsh women wearing their traditional shawls. One of Earth's greatest armies was defeated by a fashion misunderstanding. 23. It is hard to find a more brutally ironic tragedy in corporate history than the fate of Jimmy Heselden. This brilliant millionaire proudly owned the company that manufactured the famous self-balancing Segway. While out for a scenic ride on one of his company's rugged off-road models near his sprawling country estate, he encountered a guy walking a dog. Attempting to be incredibly polite, Jimmy tried to back up to make room, completely lost control of the expensive scooter, and drove it directly off a massive limestone cliff. It is dark, but you genuinely cannot write a more poetic exit for a transportation tycoon. 24. Intimidation tactics only work if the other side is actually scared. In 1958, the Ku Klux Klan completely misread the room when they tried to hold a massive night rally to terrorize the Lumbee Native American tribe in North Carolina. Instead of cowering in fear, hundreds of heavily armed Lumbee tribal members showed up, completely encircled the racist gathering, and started firing their rifles into the night sky. The so-called tough guys instantly panicked, abandoned their pathetic white robes, and sprinted away into the dark swamps crying for their lives. It remains one of the most utterly humiliating retreats in American history. 25. The year 1184 delivered the Erfurt latrine disaster, a highly chaotic event that is precisely as disgusting as it sounds. King Henry VI gathered dozens of Europe's most elite, powerful nobles for a very serious political summit inside a grand church. But the ancient wooden floor simply could not handle that much royal ego and catastrophic weight. It collapsed completely, dumping over 60 highly dressed aristocrats straight down into a massive, festering liquid cesspool directly underneath the building. They literally drowned in a massive sea of human waste. Truly a terrible day to be wearing heavy velvet robes. 26. Desperation during World War II led the British military to dream up Project Habakkuk, an incredibly serious plan to build a massive aircraft carrier out of solid ice and wood pulp. The grand theory was that a giant frozen ship would be unsinkable, immune to torpedoes, and incredibly cheap to manufacture. They actually spent millions of dollars testing this frozen monstrosity in Canadian lakes before realizing one massive, totally obvious flaw. When you strap boiling hot engines to a giant block of ice and sail it into the summer sun, the whole thing just melts. Military intelligence at its absolute finest. 27. Open sewers used to be the norm, but London in 1858 took urban filth to an apocalyptic level. The River Thames was so choked with millions of gallons of untreated human waste that the horrific stench was officially dubbed the Great Stink. It got so unbelievably bad that politicians in Parliament had to soak their heavy window curtains in harsh chemicals just to stop themselves from vomiting during legislative meetings. They finally agreed to fund a massive modern sewer system. Not to save poor citizens dying of cholera, mind you, but entirely because the wealthy politicians could no longer tolerate the smell. 28. A simple marketing contest managed to turn the Philippines into a literal war zone back in 1992. A major soda company promised a ₱1,000,000 prize to anyone who found the number 349 under their bottle cap. Thanks to a catastrophic computer error, that exact winning number was printed on 800,000 caps instead of just 2. When millions of citizens realized the corporation was refusing to pay out billions of dollars they physically did not possess, total anarchy erupted. Furious mobs aggressively firebombed delivery trucks and launched an avalanche of lawsuits over a terrible sugar water promotion. 29. Burning tax money is a CIA specialty, but Operation Acoustic Kitty really takes the prize for sheer stupidity. During the Cold War, the agency blew $20 million in 5 long years trying to turn a living cat into a cyborg super spy. They surgically implanted a microphone inside the poor animal and ran a hidden antenna up its tail just to eavesdrop on Soviet officials. During the highly anticipated, multi-million-dollar first field test, they released the feline near a park bench. It immediately wandered into the busy street and was squashed completely flat by a random taxicab. Mission spectacularly failed. 30. If you ever find a mysteriously warm metal object in a freezing forest, just walk away. A group of guys in a snowy Georgian woodland in 1998 learned this the hard way. Stumbling upon two incredibly warm, heavy metal cylinders half buried in the dirt, they casually used them as convenient little foot heaters for their campsite. Unfortunately, those unshielded metal tubes were actually abandoned Soviet radiothermal generators, fully powered by highly radioactive strontium-90. These guys spent the night peacefully warming their freezing hands on literal nuclear waste, naturally ending up in the hospital with catastrophic, life-threatening radiation burns. 31. What do you do when motorsport is far too expensive for your budget? If you were a group of British friends in 1973, you headed to the pub, got deeply intoxicated, and founded the highly prestigious British Lawnmower Racing Association. Fast forward to today, and this ridiculous concept is an intensely serious sport. Grown adults completely rip the cutting blades off standard garden tractors, tune the small engines to the absolute limit, and drift around dirt tracks at speeds hitting 50 miles per hour. It is undeniable proof that if an object has a motor, men will absolutely find a way to race it. 32. The next time you complain about a 20-minute delay on the highway, think about the legendary Beijing traffic jam of 2010. Millions of highly stressed drivers found themselves trapped in a brutal gridlock that stretched for 60 agonizing miles and lasted an unbelievable 12 straight days. Vehicles crawled forward at a truly pathetic pace of just 2 miles per day. Local villagers quickly realized they had a totally captive audience and started wandering onto the highway to sell instant noodles and warm water at ridiculously inflated prices. It birthed a highly lucrative microeconomy fueled entirely by exhaust fumes and blinding road rage. 33. The U.S. Air Force Wright Laboratory seriously requested funding in 1994 to invent a weapon they officially called the gay bomb. This was not a joke. The grand, highly classified master plan was to load an explosive shell with absurdly powerful chemical aphrodisiacs and drop it directly onto enemy forces. The military theorists genuinely believed the gas would make hostile soldiers so overwhelmingly attracted to one another that they would drop their weapons and start aggressively making love in the dirt. Believe it or not, the Pentagon eventually reviewed this wild proposal and rejected it. A truly missed opportunity for aggressive world peace. 34. You would think a brilliant organization like NASA would know better than to ask the internet for help. They launched a massive online poll to let the public name a brand new, multi-million-dollar module for the International Space Station. Comedian Stephen Colbert immediately told his massive television audience to crash the poll. Sure enough, the internet overwhelmingly voted to officially name the scientific marvel Colbert. Refusing to be publicly bullied by a late-night comedian, a very grumpy NASA completely ignored the democratic results and named the room Tranquility instead. It is rock-solid proof that democracy is entirely useless when zero gravity is involved. 35. A dedicated Hooters waitress hustled for months because her manager loudly promised a shiny brand-new Toyota to whoever sold the most beer. On the day of the big reveal, she was blindfolded and led out to the restaurant parking lot in front of her cheering co-workers. The incredibly smug manager ripped off her blindfold and proudly handed her a tiny plastic Yoda doll from Star Wars. Toy Yoda. Do you get it? Well, she absolutely did not laugh at his pathetic dad joke. She immediately sued the corporate franchise for fraud, crushed them in court, and walked away with enough cash to buy whatever car she desired. 36. Forcing stubborn people to eat healthy requires absolute genius-level manipulation. King Frederick the Great desperately needed his German subjects to start eating potatoes to prevent mass starvation. But the peasants entirely refused to touch the weird, dirty dirt apples. So, Frederick used some brilliant reverse psychology. He loudly declared the potato a fiercely protected royal vegetable and posted heavily armed military guards around his private fields. Predictably, the peasants figured anything worth guarding with rifles had to be incredibly valuable. They immediately started sneaking in at night, stealing the crops, and planting the potatoes themselves, exactly as the tricky king planned. 37. Failing upwards is an art form, but Lord Timothy Dexter was the absolute Picasso of stupidity. This wildly uneducated man was so gullible that his wealthy business rivals constantly gave him terrible advice just to try and bankrupt him. As a hilarious joke, they convinced him to ship a massive boatload of coal to Newcastle, which happened to be the biggest coal mining city in England. It was a guaranteed financial disaster. But sheer, stupid luck was on his side. His boat arrived precisely during a massive, totally unexpected miners' strike, and he sold all his worthless coal for an absolute fortune. 38. Assassinating President Andrew Jackson was essentially an elaborate method of committing suicide. An unemployed painter stepped in front of the 67-year-old leader, raised a pistol, and pulled the trigger. It misfired. The panicked attacker pulled out a second loaded pistol, and miraculously, that one failed too. The odds of both guns malfunctioning in the humid weather were roughly 1 in 125,000. Jackson was so violently insulted by the attempt that he immediately beat the shooter near to death with his walking cane. Bystanders actually had to physically drag the raging president off the bleeding assassin. 39. Finding a loophole in a corporate promotion can be incredibly lucrative. In the 1990s, Pepsi ran a goofy commercial promising a literal Harrier fighter jet to anyone who could somehow collect 7 million Pepsi points. They assumed absolutely nobody would ever achieve this. Enter John Leonard, a clever college student who spotted fine print allowing you to just buy points for 10 cents each. He convinced investors to give him $700,000, mailed Pepsi a giant check, and politely demanded his military aircraft. A massive, humiliating legal battle erupted, with Pepsi desperately arguing that handing heavy artillery to a teenager was obviously a joke. 40. Never launch a massive international product without checking the local street slang first. Coca-Cola learned this humiliating lesson when attempting to launch Dasani bottled water in the United Kingdom. Their aggressively expensive marketing campaign prominently featured a catchy slogan bragging that the water was full of spunk. In America, that means courage. In British slang, it strictly refers to a very specific, sticky bodily fluid. Adding insult to injury, journalists quickly exposed that this premium beverage was literally just filtered tap water from a London suburb. The entire brand became an absolute laughingstock and was ripped off the shelves immediately. 41. The absolute dumbest flex in human history was quietly drafted by the U.S. Air Force in 1958 under the name Project A-119. Their highly classified master plan was to launch a massive nuclear bomb straight into space and detonate it directly on the surface of the moon. The entire goal was just to create a blinding flash of light that everybody in the Soviet Union could look up and see from their backyard. Thankfully, a few sane scientists pointed out that scattering a highly radioactive debris cloud across the Earth's atmosphere might be a slight public relations nightmare, and the unhinged project was scrapped. 42. Endurance running is grueling, but Mauro Prosperi accidentally turned it into a terrifying horror movie. During a massive marathon through the Sahara Desert, he got completely lost and aimlessly wandered the scorching dunes for 9 agonizing days. Desperate for any hydration, he survived by drinking his own urine and snacking on raw, mummified bats he found inside an abandoned desert shrine. Reaching his absolute breaking point, he decided to slit his own wrist to end the suffering. But his body flatly refused to quit. He was so severely dehydrated that his blood instantly clotted, stubbornly saving his life completely against his own will. 43. Finding a clever legal loophole can literally save your life. After brutally crushing the city of Weinsberg in the year 1140, the conquering king generously announced a truce. He declared that the local women would be allowed to safely leave the castle, and they could take whatever precious items they could physically carry on their backs. Naturally, he assumed they would scramble for gold jewelry and expensive dresses. Instead, the heavy castle gates opened, and every single woman marched out carrying her terrified husband on her back. The king thought this cheeky stunt was so incredibly brilliant that he laughed out loud and let all the men live. 44. When a vicious invading army threatens to burn your entire city to the ground, the only logical defense strategy is aggressive alcoholism. During the brutal 30 Years' War, the picturesque German town of Rothenburg was facing total annihilation. The ruthless enemy general offered them one utterly bizarre chance at survival. He promised to spare the town if the local mayor could chug a massive 3-liter tankard of wine without taking a single breath. Sweating profusely, the brave mayor stepped up, effortlessly slammed the entire giant pitcher of booze, miraculously saved the lives of his citizens, and immediately passed out for 3 straight days. 45. The French National Railway pulled off an absolutely spectacular, multi-billion-dollar accounting failure in 2014. Management excitedly spent 15 billion euros to purchase a sleek, incredibly modern fleet of 2,000 brand-new commuter trains. There was just one tiny, wildly embarrassing miscalculation. The engineers completely forgot to measure the size of the older stations. Consequently, every single new train was entirely too wide to physically fit through over 1,300 local platforms across the countryside. The humiliated government was forced to cough up an extra 50 million euros just to literally chip away the concrete edges of the stations so their fat new trains could squeeze through. 46. The 1950s was a golden era for futuristic household appliances that absolutely nobody needed. The absolute peak of this consumer madness was the hovering vacuum cleaner. Instead of using tiny wheels like a normal machine, this heavy beast floated around your living room entirely on a powerful cushion of exhaust air. Sure, it looked incredibly cool gliding across the floor, but there was a hilarious, fatal design flaw. It violently blasted massive amounts of air downwards, aggressively blowing all the dirt, dust, and pet hair you were trying to clean all over your nice furniture. It was essentially a deafening indoor leaf blower. 47. Making a terrible bet after a few drinks is standard behavior, but Thomas Fitzpatrick elevated it to a federal crime. In the 1950s, he drunkenly wagered his bar buddies that he could travel from New Jersey to New York in exactly 15 minutes. To prove his absolute dominance, he broke into an airfield, stole a single-engine plane, and flawlessly landed it on a crowded Manhattan street right outside the pub. Fast forward 2 years, and another guy at the exact same bar refused to believe the local legend. Naturally, Thomas got drunk and stole a second airplane just to prove his point again. 48. Walking through a spooky haunted house is fun until you realize the props are legally dead. That is exactly what happened when a TV crew was filming an episode of The $6 Million Man at a Six Flags amusement park. A crew member tried to adjust a creepy, glowing mannequin hanging from the ceiling, and its entire arm aggressively snapped off, revealing an actual human bone inside. It turned out to be the real, mummified corpse of a Wild West outlaw named Elmer McCurdy. The poor dead guy had been unknowingly used as a cheap painted carnival decoration for roughly 60 years. 49. For exactly 24 hours in 2015, the entire nation of Ireland accidentally became the wildest party on earth. A bizarre legal loophole in a court ruling suddenly voided the country's existing drug laws. Overnight, ecstasy, ketamine, and crystal meth became perfectly legal, and the government was absolutely powerless to stop it. Parliament frantically scrambled to pass an emergency fix, but they literally had to wait until the next morning to vote. You just know the pubs were empty because half the country was busy talking to colors and petting their living room rugs. The luck of the Irish took on a completely new, highly unregulated meaning that night. 50. Before modern anesthesia was a thing, the only way to survive a brutal amputation was for the surgeon to move incredibly fast. Enter Robert Liston, a famous 19th-century doctor known for his blazing speed with a bone saw. During one highly chaotic operation, he was slicing away so aggressively that he accidentally completely chopped off 2 of his surgical assistant's fingers along with the patient's infected leg. Both the patient and the assistant quickly died of gangrene. To make matters vastly worse, an elderly spectator in the viewing gallery literally dropped dead from pure shock, resulting in the only surgery in human history with a 300% mortality rate. So, which of these absolute disasters proves that human evolution peaked a long time ago? Drop your verdict in the comments. And if you think your own terrible life decisions are slightly less embarrassing than fighting the ocean or mailing a baby, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It is the only smart choice you are going to make today.